Good evening, everybody. I call the meeting to order. It's 6:00 p.m. on December 10th. We're at the Springville Central Region office of the Division of Wildlife. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Regional Advisory Council meeting. The meeting is being held in person as well as streamed live on YouTube. The public forum allows you to express your opinions and ideas on wildlife management in our state. The RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes it's emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah. It's why we're all here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion today in today's meeting to fill out one of these comment cards. This is how you make a comment in here. We expect those in attendance to respect the people who speak, especially those who hold views that don't align with their own. Respectful behavior helps facilitate an efficient meeting where the RAC members can listen, digest, and address concerns, ideas, and proposals being presented. Disrespectful behavior, including booing, yelling, cheering, or laughing while someone is speaking, won't be tolerated. Let's just be nice to everybody. Help reduce distractions during the meeting by putting your phone on silent. If you need to take a call, please step outside. I'd like to welcome all the RAC members and ask everybody to introduce themselves. Let's start over here with Josh.
Joshua Leonard, Sportsman's Rep.
Mike Christensen at large.
Drew Eline, Wildlife Biologist, Forest Service.
Braden Shepard, Ag.
Bryce Castanetto at large.
John Ziegler, non-consumption.
Eric Reed, Bureau of Land Management.
Kellen Heyer, Agriculture.
And then we have two individuals online, Jim and Amos. Jim first.
Jim Schuler, non-consumptive.
Amos, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, this is Amos Murphy. I'm out in Ivapai area with the Confederate Tribes, the Goshen Reservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amos. And then would also like to recognize we have two board members online. We have Paula Richmond and we have Gary Nielsen online. Gary called me when I was on my way here. He wanted to be here, but he's a little under the weather, so he's participating online. I'd also like to welcome the DWR staff, specifically those that provided presentations and are available to answer questions throughout the meeting. Those individuals include Jason Jones, the Migratory Bird and Falconry Program Coordinator, Darren DeBloois, the Mammals Coordinator, Rusty Robinson, the Once in a Lifetime Species Coordinator, Devri Tanner, the Wildlife Biologist, and Jason Robinson, Wildlife Biologist in Tooele. And I'd like to do a special welcome to all the public that are here. Again, those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to ask questions or comment on any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, again, fill this out. You can ask a question without filling one of those out. Those that are watching online have had an opportunity to make comments electronically before this meeting, and we'll go over the comments that have been made, but you won't be able to make comments tonight. Normally here, well, let's do that. We ask for approval of the last minutes and approval of tonight's agenda. Is anybody willing to make that motion? Motion from Don, second, and a second. Braden, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, normally I would give a wildlife board update. Oh, there has not been a wildlife board meeting since the last RAC meeting. That meeting is this Thursday. I'd encourage everybody to tune in and watch that meeting. So I'll turn the time over to Sydney Lamb, who's filling in for Jason Vernon tonight, to give a regional update.
Thanks, Brock. We'll get that up on the screen for us. All right, we'll get started with the Central Region update. Plenty of things to to talk about that our folks have been doing over the last several months. You can go to the next. The wildlife section is busy with postseason deer classification, which runs from November through the end of December. So they're continuing that. If there are any RAC members that are interested in participating, just get in contact with me or one of the local biologists. We also have deer captures in full swing. We're currently capturing on the Nebo unit. Once again, you're welcome to participate. Just same thing, chat with me or one of the biologists. Captures have been going well. So far, we've captured on the central region portion of the Manti as well as the Wasatch unit. And finally, we have a couple of turkey-related happenings going on. We're relocating some nuisance turkey out of the South Fork Provo Canyon, as well as receiving a transplant of 25 turkeys from Texas to release on the Stansburys. That's part of just some genetic variation that we're trying to add to that group. You can go to the next. Aquatic section are taking a look at fish movement. They've installed 4 pit tag antennas along the Provo River Delta. These will monitor fish movement of junesucker, walleye, and carp. The antenna reads the tag and lets them know how they're moving. They're also preparing funding proposals for the next fiscal year with a focus on Tibble Fork, Diamond Fork, and Jordanelle Reservoir, as well as participating in trout in the classroom. Eggs will be delivered to Utah classrooms on January 8th, and we have schools and volunteers helping prepare the tanks. Next, habitat section. Fall's a really busy time for the habitat section. They've been doing a lot of great work. They've masticated over 1,000 acres of juniper on the 12-mile and Lassen Draw WMAs for improved mule deer winter habitat. They've built 230 stream restoration structures in 12-mile Thistle Creek and Dairy Fork WMAs, as well as planted approximately 100,000 shrub seedlings on 10 different winter range sites. So we appreciate their work, and a lot's been going on this fall. With the outreach section, there is an ice fishing tips and tricks seminar happening on January 23rd. They also are working on the trout in the classroom egg distribution that will happen on January 8th. Lots of outreach trainings and meetings coming up in 2025. And we'd like to give a little shout out to Scott Root, who's retiring this month after 35 years of service for the Division of Wildlife. Some big changes are coming up for law enforcement, which we'll hear about in this section. We have officers finishing up a lot of investigations that started during the hunting season and completing those reports. There is a consolidation of all DNR law enforcement that will go into effect at the beginning of January. Enforcement, there has been a slight change in some of their boundaries. So the enforcement of the Wasatch County will now be covered by Northeastern Region officers, and Millard County will now fall under Central Region. So they don't strictly follow. In this particular case, there are over 200 turkeys in a pretty residential part of South Fork where there are quite a few homes. When you get that many turkeys on top of each other, they start to cause property damage and just a general ruckus and nuisance. So we're not attempting to remove all the turkeys from that space, but just thin the herd down a little bit. And we generally trap and then relocate those turkeys to other places where better habitat suited for them. So.
Any other questions? Congratulations, Scott. What an achievement, buddy. You bet. Okay, with that, we'll move to the first action item on the agenda, which is item number 5, waterfowl recommendations. Jason Jones, Migratory Bird and Falconry Program Coordinator. Jason, I don't know if you have something you want to add to your presentation before we start asking questions.
No, I'm ready to go.
Okay, questions for Jason about the waterfowl recommendations?
Yeah, I've got a quick question. Jason, in the beginning of your presentation, I saw the slide. We had North America represented in habitat discussion. Is the North American duck population, did I interpret it right? It's falling over the last couple of years?
I think I don't have the presentation in front of me, but I think it's fallen by 4% over the last few years.
Okay, just 4%?
Yeah, which is not much below the long-term average.
Okay.
And those
Okay.
numbers I get right from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
And again, being relatively new to this, the language, I understand bag limit, that's pretty self-explanatory. But how do you define possession limit and how do you enforce that?
How do we enforce possession limit? That's a little more difficult. We'd have to have officers coming to people's homes all the time. But basically, you've got a bag limit and you have a possession limit. That's allowed as many as you're allowed to have in your freezer or at home, right? So the daily bag limit and then possession limit is 3 times the daily bag limit for migratory birds typically.
Right. So what makes one try to enforce a possession limit? How often do you enforce that or check on it?
Well, I'm not in law enforcement. I mean, we can ask one of our law enforcement officers, but I mean, I think possession limit is one of those things that's a little bit, it's hard to check on, it's hard to enforce. Yeah.
Let's hear the answer. How do you enforce that?
Is it primarily the honor system?
Yes, it is primarily the honor system. Like he mentioned, it would be us going into homes and looking in fridges and freezers and stuff like that, looking. Sometimes we get reports from other hunters that'll detail the number of birds that have been harvested, and we'll follow up on those investigations, but that's where it's at.
Okay, thanks.
I have one question. So I had a couple calls and the concerns were about the scop season being so early in northern Utah before the scop get here, but the southern Utah gets later. Is that
Right,
because they
so-
get there earlier? I mean, they were recommending that we have it the same late in both areas. What's your response to that?
So I haven't had any emails about that, any formal emails. I've heard a lot of duck hunters tell me that they think that we should have the scop season start later in northern Utah, such as it does in southern Utah. Blair Stringham, when he was waterfowl coordinator, crunched the numbers. We used to do a lot of bag checks on our areas. And so Blair crunched the bag check data and he crunched the census data. And basically people were killing more scop earlier and there were more scop here earlier. I don't really have a dog in this fight. And in our frameworks, the RAC could propose that we move the northern scop season to the end of the season if they wanted to. I don't really think we should because the data doesn't support that. And if we do decide to move the scop season, it'd probably be good to come back to it maybe on the next cycle and let me set up a survey for the public and see what they really think. But yeah, I hear some duck hunters tell me that they think that there's more scop here later. The data just doesn't support it. So I don't really think that we should move it till the end of the season.
That's a great response. I just wanted to make sure these sportsmen knew they were heard.
I mean, we could implement a survey over the next 3 years and see what sportsmen think, but the data really doesn't support it. I mean, Blair took like 4 or 5 years of our data and there's just more scop here earlier and there are more scop getting killed earlier than there are later.
Mike?
We had a couple of public questions that I think we should address. One of them is, why doesn't Utah County have a sandhill crane hunt?
So just to be clear, we work within the framework set by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. If you all are not familiar, states come together with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife in the different flyways, and we go over all the data and reports, and we develop the federal frameworks for migratory bird hunting. Fish and Wildlife has the final say on that. And as far as sandhill cranes go, we're allowed to hunt in Rich, Box Elder, Cache, and Uintah counties. And that's where it's known that the Rocky Mountain population of sandhill cranes migrates through. And that population of sandhill cranes can withstand a certain level of harvest. And it is thought that the lower Colorado River Valley of sandhill cranes migrates all through central and southern Utah, and their management plan doesn't allow any sustainable harvest. So it'd be hard for us to justify making a recommendation to change that framework. We are trying to put some transmitters on sandhill cranes. They're fairly difficult to catch because I'm not so sure that the cranes around here are lower Colorado River Valley cranes. They might just be Rocky Mountain population sandhill cranes. So if we can show that the birds are either Rocky Mountain or over time, the flyway allows some harvest of that other population. We could possibly get a hunt here, but we can't have a hunt in Utah County right now because it's not in our frameworks.
I think that's a great answer. Same with the swan hunt. Is it the same answer where it has to be done in a certain geographical area?
So yeah, we would have to do a framework change to change the swan hunt, and 99% of the swans are in northern Utah. And I think the biggest fish to fry with swans right now, we're dealing with the issue with trumpeter swans, which Utah is trying to work on through the flyway process. But there's a chance in the future we could have a statewide swan hunt, but I think we really have to solve the issue with trumpeter swans in our quota. And I'm happy to get into that a little bit. I don't want to get too in the weeds on trumpeter swans, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I think we've had that quite a bit the last 2 years.
Yeah.
That was a great answer. I appreciate that. And that hopefully can address the concerns that the public expressed. I have a question on the combining the guidebooks or combining different species into the guidebooks. How does that, how will that work? Is it going to be like a migratory guidebook, or what is that? What was your vision for that? Because
so I want to maintain the waterfowl heritage. And so we haven't decided exactly what it would be called. Montana does it, and they just call it the Migratory Bird Game Book. And we might call it Waterfowl and Migratory Game Birds. We haven't decided, but I mean, all those migratory game birds are under my program, and they're managed at the flyway level, and really think it makes sense for the public to do this. It simplifies regulations, but really, we've brought them into the rule together, and they'll just be published in the Waterfowl and Migratory Bird Guidebook. We haven't decided exactly what it might be named, pending the RAC and board approval, but.
okay.
I think that's fundamental, by the way, is what it's called.
Yes, and I'll say that for my comments.
Any other questions? Awesome. I'll turn the time over to Sid. Are there any public comments here?
Is this where I go over
Yes.
okay. We had a few public comments on this agenda item with the waterfowl recommendations. The question was, which best describes your position regarding the proposed changes to the waterfowl and migratory game bird hunting rules? We had 4 total votes, and they were pretty split. 1 strongly agree, 1 somewhat agree, 1 neither agree nor disagree, and 1 strongly agree. Summary of comments includes, we would like to see DWR consider working with partners to provide more ADA access for waterfowl hunting, would like swan hunting statewide in Utah, and would like a sandhill crane hunt in Utah County. Would like to see border change of the Wasatch Front Goose Zone to only the Wasatch Front and take the Wasatch Back area out of the front zone and include it into the regular northern zone. Would like to see the proposed change to the SCOP season applied for the entire state rather than just the southern duck zone.
Thank you, Sydney. We don't have any public comments on this item. Did anybody put one in? This is it for waterfowl. You have to have one of these cards here filled out. Not for a question. I'm sorry, I should have asked for public question. Go ahead, buddy.
Excuse me, we need you to turn on the mic, please.
Yeah, turn on the mic and ask. These are questions for John. So
John, my questions are about the Black Hawk club that the state acquired. Is that something that's going to be granted access to the public? Are they going to have access to hunting that area?
So I'm Jason. So I just want to say I went over a little bit of the Black Hawk in my presentation if you watched it. The Black Hawk will be open to the public, but right now we're working out access issues. So roads and parking lots, fencing and all that kind of stuff. So
okay.
All those safety issues have to be taken care of before we can open that to the public.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was my next question, was the access. And then did you consider it all, like, instead of allowing access to the public, making it like a rest area for the waterfowl?
I'm not going to manage the property, but I highly doubt that it's good that that property was purchased with legislative help that we're gonna just turn into a rest area. That probably wouldn't go over well with the majority of the public.
Okay.
So that's probably not gonna be what we're gonna do with that property. But I'm not gonna manage the property. It's gonna be open to the public is what we've decided.
I need
don't
to
know
watch
when
your
it's gonna be open to
presentation,
the
so.
public, but-
Cool. Thank you, Jason.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Sorry about not asking for public comment. Any questions? Any other questions from the public?
And folks set up right next to the rest area, and then they sail birds in the rest area. They can't retrieve them. You can't trespass in the rest area. And we already have a retrieval zone at Farmington Bay that goes back to the 90s, but it's not in the waterfowl rule. And it's an area where you can't hunt, but you can retrieve birds. And so that's the idea behind the retrieval zone. It just will border our rest areas and our waterfowl management areas. So if you sail a bird into it, you can retrieve it. But you can't hunt up or you can't hunt in it and set up in it.
And about how wide is that retrieval area? And generally speaking,
Couple hundred yards, if I remember right.
enough to let the birds rest where they're supposed to be able to rest.
Yeah.
I think you said 200 feet, maybe only 60 yards, 70 yards.
Yeah,
I think it was 200 feet in the presentation.
yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but it might be. Mhm.
Okay, now we'll have discussion.
I don't know why, but when I watched the presentation, I asked a couple just hunters how they thought about what they thought about combining doves and band-tailed pigeons into waterfowl into one booklet. And granted, it was just two people, but I'm kind of on the same page where it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We've got decades of precedents where when we want to see what the dove season is, we look in the Upland Game guidebook. And now that we're doing like a 3-year, we're passing this for 3 years. I don't see the need to combine them, but like Brock said, if they do, then the name we should be careful of what's done there. But I think overall, I don't mind what's been presented except for that part. I'd probably be against that myself. But.
And I'm actually saying, I mean, I like basically everything that was presented, but maybe just because I'm an old timer and it's always been found in one place and that's where you go to look for it. And so that's, I mean, to me, I'm kind of indifferent. I do like that you keep it there, but if you change it, it's got to have a name change and there's got to be a big education effort because for the last 40 years, 50 years, I've gone to a place to look for it. Doesn't look like there's any other comments. I'll entertain motions.
Well, since I'm the only one that spoke. Thanks. I make the motion that we accept as presented, except we do not approve the combining of the all migratory bird species into one guidebook.
There's a motion to accept as presented, but we don't approve the portion to move the migratory birds that are not waterfowl into the waterfowl guidebook.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second to that motion. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah,
ahead, Brendan.
Mike, I was just thinking back when I was the attorney in Nebraska, Game and Parks, how we did it. And with the same issue came up and I just pulled it up again. We have the small game and waterfowl guidebook, just in one guidebook. So, we could just combine the guidebooks. And in fact, sometimes as a hunter, it's like, oh crud, where's the guidebook for this or that? I wouldn't mind having just like the guidebook, but I don't have a fight in this either way. So.
Yeah, that's above my pay grade, but I think that makes sense too. But I don't know that for me in my mind, and like Brock said, I don't know that it makes sense for me to want to see the dove regulations. I go look at the waterfowl, but for turkeys and rabbits and chuckers, I go and look in a different spot. But that's just the way my mind thinks, and I think it gets confusing on, like, I feel like the waterfowl, like to shoot any waterfowl, you have to have still shot. But to shoot doves, I can shoot doves with lead shot anywhere except on the waterfowl management area. So that's just the way my mind works. So.
In fact, I had just leaned over to Bryce and asked him that exact question. Like, if they become migratory, do I need to now use still shot for doves? So see, I'm already thinking what you just mentioned. So Jason, I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, really, my whole idea behind doing this was to simplify regulations for hunters, and I think this does this. I mean, there's a lot of confusion across the United States about what you have, whether you have to register for HIP or not. And that's why Fish and Wildlife gives us all this educational outreach documents that we put in our books that kind of trains folks on, do you need to register for HIP or do you not need to register for HIP? And I know that we should be working towards simplifying regulations, and I think that this does this. And I'm a waterfowl hunter, I have been for a long time. And it's important for me to maintain the heritage of waterfowl hunting. But the idea behind doing this is to simplify regulations for hunters in Utah, not make them more complex. And I think it's a good idea. That's why I put a lot of work into it. Of course, you guys can make whatever decision you want, but I think that this makes sense for Utah waterfowl hunters and will simplify things for people. And upcoming, we would keep the material in both books until folks got used to this. And I know there are some issues with steel shot and lead shot on various properties, but I think we can handle that. And that's about all I have to say. I mean, I brought this forth to simplify regulations. That was the whole idea behind it for me. So.
Thank you, Jason. Any other discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Bryce.
I was just gonna say, I think what my sons, what they do when they look at regulations, they'll just Google, and that takes them directly to whatever tab they need to click on. And I don't know if that's what a lot of people do. That's what I think the younger people tend to. I'm still like you guys, where I'm gonna go and grab I want to look at it, I want to read through it, I want to see any changes. So I honestly could go either direction on this.
And that's how I am too. I mean, I'm probably, I don't get a vote unless it's split, but I'd probably go with Jason here if I make the deciding vote. So any other discussion? I'll call for a vote on the motion. So the motion is approved as presented with the exception of putting the migratory birds that are not waterfowl into the waterfowl guidebook. All those in favor of the motion? And those opposed? Jim, motion fails. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Amos, I didn't hear your vote.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Okay, so 7-4, it fell 7-4. I'll entertain a different motion.
I'll make the same motion, except for I would accept Jason's recommendation of the guidebook based on his, I actually had a little tear in my eye when Jason was talking.
So your motion, Jim, is to accept as presented.
That's correct.
Do we have a second? We have a second from Eric. Any discussion on this motion?
Just because Braden brought it up, I think Nebraska makes a lot of sense in combining small game with waterfowl. Like, why do we have two separate guidebooks? Like, as opposed to carving out dove, Why do we have two separate that makes more sense to me because they're both really thin books, but just a comment.
So I think we could maybe make that as a supplemental recommendation. If we approve this, we recommend to the board that they put that as an action item or something. Any other discussion on this motion?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic, more information in one place. It's easier to find. And it streamlines the process for, I think, several hunts. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to accept as presented. All those in favor? Amos? Amos, did you vote? Yes, I hear you.
Okay.
Do you vote in favor?
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Does somebody want to make a secondary motion here to make a recommendation to the board that we consider combining the guidebooks?
I'll make that motion that we consider combining the small game, upland game and the waterfowl into one guide.
We have a motion and a second from Bryce. We make a recommendation to combine the guidebooks. Any discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Amos?
Yes.
That passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. The next action item is number 6, falconry reporting requirement recommendations. Jason Jones. Sorry, Jason, for calling you the wrong name earlier.
Oh, it's fine.
I'll try not to do that again. You want to state anything about this recommendation, or you just want questions?
This is another recommendation that makes things better for our public, for our falconers. Just a small recommendation to make reporting requirements easier for falconers, and a couple things to clean up some language in the rule that's outdated.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions from the RAC for Jason? Go ahead, Brady.
Mike and I were discussing this earlier, and why the possession limit's only 3? I guess that was the big question is, do the falcons take a few extra birds, and so your take limit is only 3, whereas an upland hunter.
As set by the feds. It's like that in 50 states. And honestly, I don't know the exact answer why falconers only get 3 and waterfowl hunters get more. But
it's a federal
level though. I can investigate and get back with you. So
that's all right. I just thought it was something we had here at the city of Utah put together, but not a big deal.
Any other questions from the RAC? Any questions from the public? Turn the time. Oh, we have one question here from Bryce.
I do have a question. How many falconers is that? Falconers? Yeah. Falconists. How many of them are there?
There's about 220 active falconers, but there's been a lot more active and inactive. So but right now there's about 220 active falconers.
Do you need a COR?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Turn the time over to Sydney to present the comments.
Great. So for the falconry reporting requirement recommendation, the question was, what best describes your position regarding the proposed changes to the falconry rule? And there were no comments submitted online.
Excellent. We have one. Now we'll take public comments. We have one public comment, Krista Edwards and Hyatt Glenn. You'll have 3 minutes to make your comment unless you're representing a group, and then you'll have 5 minutes. Oh, you are Utah Falconer. So you'll have up to 5 minutes.
We're not going to take 5 minutes. We just wanted to say that we really support Jason's recommendations, and we appreciate his collaboration with the Utah Falconers Association in these rule changes.
I think this is a topic that's been highly controversial among the falconers, just because it's kind of an unneeded reporting system. And so if we can simplify it, then it makes everybody happy.
Thank you very much. That's the only comment card I have, so we'll turn it back to the RAC for discussion. Or motion.
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, to approve the, as presented.
I'll second.
So we have a motion from John, a second from Bryce to approve as presented. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Amos?
Yes.
Passes unanimously with the people that are present. The next item is item number 7, Utah Black Bear Management Plan Revision and Rule R657-33. Darren, do you have anything you want to?
Have one point of clarification on the Nebo unit. We had a couple of charts in the handouts, and one of them said there's 26 permits, the other said 36. It should be 36. That's the correct number. We just got one of our formulas messed up when we did that. So just so everybody's clear what we're voting on. And then I'm happy to answer any questions about the rest of the presentation.
Sure. Questions from the RAC for Darren?
Yeah, I've got a couple quick questions, if I may. Darren, would you refresh my recollection? How many black bear are in the city of Utah?
We
don't have a 1,400 male? Was that
yeah,
what
probably
we said, plus
40
minus?
some odd with cubs, and that's probably a minimum estimate. It's based on age at harvest. So.
And how do you estimate the age at harvest?
With a tooth. So every bear that's harvested in the state, we pull it, and they have to be checked in, and then we slice the tooth, and you can count the rings and get an age.
Okay. And of the bears that are harvested, how many are harvested using bait?
Good question. Let me pull that up, John.
You know, several of the other states in the country that allow baiting, the percentage of bears that are harvested, the significant majority are taken during the baiting.
Yeah. In Utah, between 2022 and 2024, 677 were taken with hounds. 442 were taken with bait. So that's a 3-year conglomeration. So each year would break down differently, but
that was
a good ratio.
442 with bait.
442 with bait, 677 with hounds.
Got it.
Then you'd also have spot and stock if you're doing that number.
Yeah, spawn stock, how many?
All right, hold on. All right, let me revise that. I'm looking at the wrong chart. 2024. So spring would be hounds, 87 males, 26 females. Summer is bait, 106 males, 61 females. I was looking at a chart that added everything up. Fall is another hound season, 33 males, 14 females. And then other fall is spot and stock, 17 males and 13 females.
So the portions are very similar to the big number you gave us.
Yeah, it's close. I just did
35 to
break out of
40%
spot
from
stock.
bait. Other questions, John?
How many, is it a specific bear breeding?
Yeah, you have to register. You can register up to 2 sites, and then you have to have a certificate of registration to put bait in the field. And then there, of course, are regulations around how that can be set up, how it has to be cleaned up, et cetera. I don't know that I have a quick, easy number for you, John. I can certainly get that for you. The last time I looked at it, and law enforcement handles this now. Last time I looked, it was a couple of hundred applications for bait. And that would have been a couple of years ago, but that's probably in the ballpark.
And the percentage of those permits that sold with bear baiting that successfully filled, is that 35%?
It depends on the hunt type. So, and it depends on the unit. units with high bear densities are more successful. So if you average it out across the state, they're about 30% successful in the spring with dogs, 60% successful with bait. And then in the fall with dogs, again, it's 18%, so less successful. And spot and stock's actually 30% statewide. But there's a couple of units that carry that average. With high bear densities, there people are more successful.
And one last question for you. The bear human conflict areas where the number of permits are increased, is that clearly a legitimate management technique if only a few bears are causing the problem?
Typically, we have a couple of strategies. Of course, we try to deal with the specific, bear involved in the incident. But one thing, as we discuss these things with different interest groups, one thing we agreed to is that we'll try not to manage units with high conflict stats for high numbers of bears. Trying to keep those, not trying to eliminate bears, but to keep those populations a little lower and lower the chance of conflict or depredation. So that was our strategy, and that was what we asked our biologists to look at this year.
Great, thanks, Darren.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I've got a question for you, Darren.
Sure.
Why would we count the limited entry tag holders against the harvest objective quota if they were killed during the spot and stock? What's the purpose for that?
You might have to explain a little bit more. I'm not sure I
Well,
followed you, Mike.
in your presentation, you said that we'd allow the limited entry bear tag holders the ability to hunt during the harvest objective spot and stock portion of the
And why
of the
would we
hunt.
count their harvest towards?
Yes, why would we
quota?
count that? Yep.
I guess, I guess we wouldn't necessarily have to. To me, it made sense at the time that, if you've got a quota and that's what you're trying to take, that anybody hunting during that season, we ought to count. But if the RAC would like to go a different direction, it's fine.
But am I wrong to assume that the limited entry numbers are based upon a certain, we could call it a quota, but then we have this additional quota for spot and stock hunting for over the count. Those are over the counter,
Right.
correct? And then people have to call in ahead of time to make sure the quota is still open for that unit, correct?
Yeah.
So if somebody had a limited entry bear tag and they didn't fill it during one of the early, especially for multi-season, this is pretty
This
much
would only be for
multi-season.
multi-season.
Yeah, so we're very select few, but if they did happen to harvest their bear during that spot and stock, it would
Might shut it down.
it
for
might
somebody
shut
else.
it down for somebody else who's bought over the counter.
Yeah, I think, we're not talking about a lot of people on a lot of units. I don't know that it probably matters biologically one way or the other. So if y'all would like to do it a little different, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Darren from the RAC? Questions for Darren from the public? I'll turn the time over to Sid. Oh, one, come on up. Oh, man. I didn't even see you sneak in, buddy.
Yeah, there you go.
Darren, with a lot of the indicators pointing towards a decrease on bears,
Mhm.
I guess two-part question, but I have a feeling the answer is the same. What justification were there to put some of these units into liberal harvest that were showing a decrease on the triggers, and how much pressure was there from the legislators to do that?
I wouldn't say we did go to a hearing and talked about predator management, and some of the feedback we got from the legislatures, they still had concerns about conflict, and that would include livestock depredation and just conflict in general. Things like you've got to close campgrounds and bears are coming into contact with people more often. And so that's definitely a concern, and that's something that we took into account. And so we did ask our biologists to think about what's their conflict level, where do they think their populations are, and do they have sheep allotments on their unit? And if they did, to be a little bit more liberal with their harvest strategies. So that's what we asked them to do. But obviously this is a public process. So tonight, if y'all have different suggestions, that's part of the process.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody, any other public have a question? Okay, I'll turn the time over to Sydney to report on the online comments.
All right, for the Utah Black Bear Management Plan revision and rule, question read, which best describes your position regarding the black bear proposals? There was only one total vote and it was neither agree nor disagree, but the comment made was harvest objectives should be open in August for the archery big game hunters.
Thank you, Sid. We have two public comments. The first one will be Garrett Slatkoff, followed by Corey Huntsman. Garrett? 3 minutes for yourself, your 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Here representing the Utah chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We supported this proposal. So thanks.
Thank you, Garrett. Corey?
I guess we won't fight the increases. We'll go along with the pressure to get some of these bears reduced, I guess. But with the exception of one unit, we bought the conservation permit for the North Manti, and I think it had an increase of 10. We'd like to see that go to those 10 or 11, whatever it is, go to harvest objective to kind of keep the value of that tag up. That's it.
So thank you. Appreciate it, Corey. Okay, I'll bring it back to the RAC for discussion.
So one thing, it's, approval of this, but I don't know if this is something we can work in. I do think for a Forest Service standpoint, some of the wording of the rule could be adjusted, at least for us. There's in here saying, 100 yards from water for bear baiting, half a mile of permanent dwelling or campground. One thing I think we have concern about is just including language that we can buffer all recreation sites, so it's very well understood. I know they have this in here saying, it doesn't authorize violation of any rules or regulations set by private landowners or public land management agencies, but I feel like if we work this in here now, we won't have folks come to Forest and be like, well, what are your regulations regarding it? So maybe clarifying language. Darren, I don't know if you've got other comments from that, but to clarify recreation sites, so picnic areas, trailheads, having that buffer include those areas is one thought for us.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think I got a little bit of language from might have been Avery. But yeah, if we could certainly tweak some of that if it helps. I agree. I think it's nice for a hunter not to have to contact multiple agencies. If we can agree and everybody's happy with the regs, then they can skip that step. So I'm
Great.
happy to look at that. I don't know if we need to decide on the language tonight, but if the RAC would like to look
Put
at
in
that,
our
we certainly can work
comments.
with the forest to maybe clarify it. We don't want it to be vague. We want it to be clearly understood so people understand where they can't place a bait.
Yeah, what is I don't know if I'd like half a mile from a trailhead. That's a long way to haul.
We need to figure that out.
Yeah, that's true. Straight up. I think we probably want to treat, we want to define, it need to be an established trailhead, maybe with toilets or.
Yeah.
We can work on
yeah.
the details of that. We wouldn't, if the trail crosses the road, that probably should be
Great.
something that, okay.
Yeah, and then the only other comment was also, with the containment bins, if they are being used, having some sort of identifiable number or something on them. So for us, if we do see one, potentially right there at a campground, it's identifiable for our folks, kind of, easier to track,
Yeah, I mean, they have to mark the site and I think if they use a barrel, we could tweak the rule to require a number. We wouldn't want any personal identifying info, but if it's their COR number or something like that, we could track back, but the general public wouldn't necessarily.
Shouldn't you be able to track it just by the location?
Yeah, we can work through that. We'll keep if the RAC wants to kind of give us some direction on your feelings, if you support that, we'll certainly take that forward. Then we can work out the details.
So I mean, if you can't put any personal information, you're going to have to go back to the record of who it is anyway. So if you're going back to the
Right.
record, you already have a record of the location with the COR.
You're right, Brock. We will have a location. So it may be as easy as the forest saying, hey, you know, someone left a barrel here at this location, and law can tell them who that was. So maybe we can just do that instead.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Mike.
I mean, I wouldn't be against having the COR number be attached to the drum. I mean, if that made the land management agencies feel better about it, then I don't see it. It's like in trapping, you know, you have to have your trap number attached to your trap. It wouldn't be that. We're only just talking 2 drums. It would be pretty simple, but I do have pause on allowing the limited entry tag holders harvest if they do happen to have it during the spot and stock over the counter hunt count against the quota. I think that I don't know, that's kind of like penalizing it twice or counting the harvest as twice almost in my opinion. So that's the only thing that I'm really against in this plan.
So I have a question with that, Darren. So what if the quota closes for that permit holder? Can they no longer hunt in the spot and stock, or can?
Under Mike's scenario, that unit would be closed, that season would be closed. So if you're the multi-season permit holder, yeah, you have to stop hunting until later. So that's how we'd have to handle that.
So I think I'd like to see them separate as well.
I agree. And I felt like that's 2 separate pools, are we not? Is that not 2 separate pools? There's a limited entry allotment. Those tag numbers are quantified, and then there's a separate pool like Mike was saying. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I mean, each season has an allotment of permits, and it depends on some early seasons are harvest objective too. But yeah, each hunting season is treated differently. Really, we're just talking about someone that draws a multi-season permit. We have had requests in the past that, you know, I got this permit, I could hunt on this unit, but you've got a harvest objective permit or a hunt. Why can't I hunt that? And the rule precluded it. So really what we're trying to do is say, yeah, let them hunt. And, you know, and I don't have any heartburn with not counting any harvest towards does that answer your question? Okay.
Anybody else have a comment? And if not, I'd entertain a motion. Let's hear it, Mike. You're the one talking, buddy.
My motions have failed, so I'm kind of gun shy. I mean, I'd move to approve as presented, excluding that the limited entry multi-season tag holders harvest would count against the harvest objective in the spot and stock quota.
Mike, do you feel like you want to add what Corey had mentioned? To me, it sounded reasonable.
How would you word that?
So we have a motion.
No second yet.
No second yet. So if there isn't a second, it can fail and we can come back and discuss, but we have a motion on the table right now. Is there a second for the motion?
Yeah, that's Amos. I second that.
Okay, Amos seconds it. So let's consider the current, unless Mike is willing to make a friendly amendment to the motion.
That's what I was going to say. We can amend the motion. And John, what would you recommend?
Well, again, asked Corey.
So Corey, was yours that we don't take those 10 additional permits and we move them to spot and stock, and rather than?
Yeah, just take the increase of 9 is what it is and just move them to spot and stock, just to keep the value of the conservation tag up and quality of the hunt up.
And I mean, for me, I'll be honest, I have a hard time making a management decision on the price of an auction tag. I've sat in a lot of meetings where that was considered, and I just think that that's maybe not the route I would go. Although if it was spot and stock during the harvest objective, that's what would it be during because on the Manti, if I understand right, they just have the spot and stock is by quota. I mean, that's an interesting thought. Go ahead, Bryce.
For what it's worth, I think last year, 23, there were 9 on the harvest objective and only 1 bear was harvested on the North Manti. Is that correct? So I guess my point would be if we could add 20, it wouldn't matter. I mean, we're not going to kill 20 bears, right? That's a very challenging hunt that time of year. So I don't know if it changes much.
So, but the earlier hunt would be more successful, so we'd actually be penalizing the hunters who drew that. So while I appreciate the sentiment, I would probably reject that amendment. Yeah.
Not amend your motion.
Yeah.
And just to answer the question, the quota was 12 and they harvested 1 bear.
Yeah. Any other discussion on the motion? Yes. Okay, I'll call for a vote. The motion is approve as presented with the exception of
Counting the limited entry potential harvest against the spot stock quotas.
correct. I had a senior moment there. All those in favor?
Yes.
All those opposed? Passes 8-1. Nine to 1. Okay, so you could make a follow-up motion, yes.
Really quick, I think that John should have a chance to.
Oh, yeah,
express
sure,
his
John. So
reasons.
'cause I'd like to have that in the notes so I can present to the board where the one dissenting vote came from.
Sure, and I'm dissenting on the basis of I think that we should remove bear baiting. I think bear baiting is not hunting, and I think it's should be reconsidered by the Wildlife Board.
Thank you very much. I will say, just to address that a little bit, not as important in Utah, but in Minnesota, if they didn't have bear bait, there's no way they'd be able to control their population there. But yeah, I understand your comment. Okay,
I would make a motion to amend that for bear bait box, that we buffer developed recreation sites and attach a COR or have discussion on that.
I'd second.
okay, we have a motion that we buffer developed recreation sites and add CORs to the containers. Any discussion on this motion?
And that would just leave it up to those entities to discuss what that buffering would be, right?
Right, and some of it might be controversial, so it might have to be come back at some point, but yeah. Any other discussion on that motion?
Yeah, I can support that. I think it would be nice though to have a more defined map or something to say, these are the developed recreation sites. So yeah, I think it's good to work on it and then maybe come back with a more detailed proposal.
Just real quick, we do when you set up your bait, we do provide a map that shows no-go zones. So we'd need to modify the map to whatever we discussed, but that would make it easier for people to see where they couldn't place a bait.
My only concern with this is a developed area like a pull-off on the side of a road, and I would not be in favor of anything like that. I mean, if it's got toilets and picnic tables, I'm all in favor, but
Yeah, for us, when I say developed recreation, that means as like those amenities. So it's going to have either a trailhead with toilets, or it's going to be a picnic area, day use site like that. Those high concentration.
I think
typically
a lot of these sites, the trailheads would be an exception. A lot of these sites would fall under kind of the campground-y idea. So we could probably just clarify the language and keep the same buffers. We can work that out. And if it looks like we're going that way, I know the forest rep in each RAC's going to bring it up. We can certainly come up with something for the board, some suggestions.
Darren, I have a couple questions. You mentioned that's already within some of the ruling, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Specifically, do we have something nailed down as far as trailheads?
So we nailed down
restrooms?
water, we nailed down campgrounds, and then there's some, as was mentioned, if you want to read it, go ahead.
So it says bait may not be placed within 100 yards of water or a public road or designated trail. or half mile from any permanent dwelling or campground. And then that's really the only two restrictions there.
We can work through it. I think someone could argue, developed trail would include trailheads, et cetera. So, but we want the force to be comfortable, and we don't want to have to make people make 2 stops. So I think we could discuss whether we need to tighten that up a little bit, but I think the spirit is there. Maybe it's just making some definitions that people can understand.
I'm fine with the spirit. I just don't want to get in trouble for pulling off the side of the road and hiking up a trail and putting a bait.
Right.
Okay. Jim and Amos, we're voting on the motion to add language to the recreation side on the bear rule. I saw a thumbs up from Jim and Amos.
Yes, I'm in favor of that.
Okay, and all those opposed? And did you vote, John? Yeah. Okay, passed unanimously then. Excellent. Okay, now we'll move to agenda item number 8, Utah Cougar recommendations and Rule R657-10. Darren, do you have anything to?
Not a lot. Let's just go to questions. I think there's really just a couple things and a little bit of cleanup in the rules. So.
Okay, questions from the RAC. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'll jump into it. Darren, does the sale of green pelts likely to affect harvest anyway? It just seems that anything that facilitates disposition of the pelt may increase the harvest. Simplistic view.
Yeah, so this is something the board asked us to look at last year. I don't know that currently a person can sell a cougar hide if it's tan. And we couldn't see anything in any of the data that would indicate that allowing that sale to take place prior to tanning would necessarily incentivize an increase in take. It may, so this is kind of a watch and see. But I don't know there's a lot of value in a lion's pelt for things like Furbearer, traditional Furbearer kind of uses. We didn't see a lot of people take multiple lions in the past, and so they'd be talking about maybe one personal harvest that they could sell for whatever reason. But again, we'd have to keep an eye on it and see what happens. And frankly, John, I think some folks would be happy if this incentivized some increased take. I think that might be part of why people thought it should be a good idea. So we'll see.
Okay, thanks for that. Regarding the number of cougars taken that you reported, you add them all up, comes out to 508 from November 23 to October 24. And in your best estimate, you're as qualified as anybody in the state of Utah to give an idea as to what the real number might be. What about those that are not reported? It seems that with the relaxation of the cougar harvesting, it's pretty well documented across the country that when you lighten up the rules and regs, that the percentage of reports tend to fall off.
Yeah, I mean, a person is still required in rule to present a harvested cougar to us. Of course, people can cheat, and then there may even be a little bit of confusion. So we're trying to clear that up with some of our online materials. That's still a requirement. Even though you no longer need a cougar permit to hunt, you still have to present that. So, do you guys have any feel for? Have you had any cases generally, or do you have a feel for whether this is going on writ large, or is that a concern? Again, this is something we made some changes. We want to kind of monitor over a period of time and then make suggestions to the board and to the RACs if we need to change some regulations to address concerns.
So in our region, I haven't seen anything like that. Our taxidermists in the area still require that information when they bring a cat in. And so for the cat to be taxidermied, we're still seeing those guys come in and
So
bring it.
they have to have documentation of the reporting of the
Yes.
taking of the
Yeah,
animal.
the taxidermists are still requiring that.
Got it. Got it.
They have to be sealed. So, if someone shot one and then just let it lie in the field, that'd be a poaching. incident,
Yes,
and
that
that'd
would be
something-
just like any other animal that they just shot and left in the field. It would be something that we would deal with, yes.
Oh, I'm sure you would, but I guess the point is that if 508 or what's being reported, we know that the number actually being taken is more than 508 because there's going to be a certain number that aren't reported. And there's depredation kills and motor vehicle strikes and such. So Darren, in your opinion, you're as educated as anybody on this topic. What do you think the real number of cougar kills are this year for the state of Utah?
That we haven't
Timeframe.
detected? Yeah, it's hard to put a number on it. We always know there's some natural mortality we don't discuss or we don't capture. I mean, if a lion dies because it tries to kill an elk and it gets kicked in the jaw and breaks its jaw, we know that occurs. Sometimes we detect that on some of our cougar studies. We saw that. But yeah, John, there's just really no way of knowing.
But you've probably got an idea what the depredation kills are.
Yeah, we do. So we work with Department of Ag, if they're taking lions and even if a landowner or a livestock producer kills an animal, that has to be reported to us. So we have a pretty good handle on that. It'd just be any kind of illegal take that may slip through the cracks. I don't think it's a big number. I think we'd start to hear more rumblings about that through, informants and those kinds of things.
So
But it's hard to know.
You did mention roadkill, and we pick up as many roadkills as we can, and those are documented. We seal those hides if they're a hide that we want to send to auction, but we do track the number of roadkills that we pick up too.
And so what's that for a year? Cougars for a year?
I don't have those numbers. 'Cause
Handful, 20.
It's probably less than 20.
Okay.
Roadkill and wildlife's or Department of Ag, 30-ish. It depends on the
Okay,
year, but
not to belabor the point though, but with 508 documented, what are we thinking? Maybe 600, 650 animals killed? for
or total.
depredation? Total?
That's probably as good a guess as any. But yeah, 10% more than, if you add the stuff that we see, roadkill, depredation, harvest, that's an additional 60 on top of sport harvest, and there might be a 10% difference.
And
That there's some literature on, what do you not detect?
Right.
And so again, it's just an educated guess. We don't know that number.
And then the last question for you, and then I'll give you a line. Knowing what the cougar population is in the state, if we've got 600, likely 600 plus minus, is that sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. That's one of the things we're looking at. Frankly, I think it is. I think cougar biology, there's a couple of things that we've learned. We've done a couple of studies with USU and with BYU. Some of these animals make big dispersal movements, and we have these throughout the state sort of source and sink populations. There's some places in the state, even with an increase in our harvest opportunities, that just don't get hunted. Above Salt Lake is a good example. You're not allowed to use dogs in the drainages. I don't think we've seen 3 cougars harvested over the last 3 years, and it's probably not much more than that over the last 10 years. So that's a good example of a source. But even within a unit that gets a large amount of harvest, there are canyons and pockets where cougars don't get hunted very hard. And so I think that's the dynamic that we'll see throughout the state, and you'll have some areas of fairly low densities where cougars will get hunted pretty hard, and then you'll have these source populations that will be contributing to that. I think we'll reach a lower overall number than what we've had maybe over the last 10 years by design, but we're not going to extirpate lions. And that's not to mention lions that come in from other states. We've seen our lions disperse to other states, and it's a two-way street. So I think that's going to be the status of lions in Utah moving forward.
All right, thanks, Darren. I appreciate the information. Very helpful.
Other questions from the RAC? Questions from the public? Turn the time over to Sydney for public comment.
All right, for item number 8, Utah Cougar recommendation and rule. The question is, which best describes your position regarding the recommended Cougar rule amendments? We had one total vote, which was neither agree nor disagree. And the summary, lion harvest should be allowed with a 17 HMR or 22 mag, regardless if it is in a trap or not.
Thank you, Sid. Bring it back to the RAC for discussion and comment. Do we have any cards?
No cards.
No cards. No comment. Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion that we accept the proposal as presented by the DWR.
A motion from Eric to accept as presented.
I'll second.
A second from Bryce. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor? Amos?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. We'll move on to agenda item number 9, Utah Furbearer recommendations and rule R657-11. Darren.
Again, this is fairly. Sorry, we're just adjusting seasons and bobcat take numbers and really nothing's changed significantly. There's a little bit of rule cleanup, I think, with it's doesn't really amount to a lot as far, at least not substantially. We changed some, UDAF for wildlife services, et cetera, that kind of thing. So just some bookkeeping stuff. So happy to answer questions.
Excellent. Questions for Darren from the RAC?
Well, Darren, you can predict what I'm going to ask you. And that's, you get 6 permits per individual with no permit cap, statewide, no permit cap.
Right.
Just two quick questions. What are the population estimates of bobcats and what's the historic harvest numbers recently?
So we, I can pull up harvest numbers, John. We don't have an estimate for bobcat numbers. We base our recommendations on 3 metrics. One is the percent of females in the harvest. One is the percent of adult. Oh, hold on. I should have looked at this before. One is the adult survival rate and one is I think it's an age. I'll pull it up. Anyway, so just based on where those 3 metrics fall, we make a recommendation for a permit take. If those are all within the parameters of the plan, then we recommend the maximum, which is 6, and that's what we're recommending we continue. And I can get that specifically for you, John. As far as harvest goes, I can pull it up as we're talking.
Oh, you're doing that, Darren. Isn't harvest strongly related to the market?
Yeah, I think what we've seen over time is that the pelt price drives those harvest numbers more than virtually anything else. And so even the metrics they're good to look at, but if people are getting a lot of money for bobcats, harvest goes up, and if not, it drops, and that seems to be the driver. And I'll pull up those harvest numbers while we're.
That's 6 permits per individual. Is that historically what we've been doing for years?
That's the top. So we'd adjust, if one or two of those parameters were out, we'd lower the number of permits an individual has. And some people fill them all and some people don't. So it's kind of based on the skill of the trapper and the motivation, if pelt prices are high.
Or some people like me buy them and then never even go out.
Along those lines, so how many people historically buy?
So 22, 23, well, the average over time is about 7,000.
And how many buy? So that equates to how
7,600.
many tags?
How many people buy?
Yeah.
About 2,000 people buy.
Okay. And about 7,600 tags.
7,600 tags.
And how many
And total
cats do you
harvest average over time was 1,645. The last couple of years, it's been lower, under 1,000.
Yeah.
It's been kind of
So
down a little bit.
So even though it
And again,
appears
that's
like,
probably pelt price more than anything.
even though it appears like it's unlimited, it's really limited. Is that correct?
We do have a study ongoing with USU to try and see if we can get some better estimates of bobcat numbers, actual population estimates, and they're actually currently working on the NEBO, looking at some of that. It might be something we can implement statewide. They're looking at a plethora of, looking at scat detection dogs and camera traps and hair snares just to see what's the most time effective and accurate way to do that. So hopefully we'll have a little bit better methodology in the future. And they're doing bears and cougars and even coyotes at the same time.
Any other questions?
Yeah, question on the seasons, on the spot and stock seasons on the Wasatch. I've had a few hunters reach out and ask and indicate they've seen quite a few more bears on the Wasatch West, kind of the stuff here on the face. When I look at the new hunts or new areas, I don't see the Wasatch West adding any additional spot and stock hunts. I personally ran into a few bears this year, more than I normally do. Usually it's like 1 or 2 bears a year.
So back to bears.
Yeah, back to bears here. Sorry, I should have brought it up earlier and it just started bugging me. And then I had a text message. So can we talk about that for a minute?
Do you want to address that?
We can talk, but everything's
It's too late. I don't know. I'm like, I want to reject my vote.
Sorry, Britton, I was working on the notes. Can you repeat your question?
No, after we voted, I got a text message from someone who said, hey, I just noticed there's not a spot and stock hunt on the Wasatch West face.
Yeah, I mean,
and is there like a concern there?
30,000 feet. What the recommendation system does is it gives them a range within to adjust their permits, and then it's totally up to the biologist to choose what hunts he wants to put them in for she. And sometimes, especially if is Wasatch, is that one that's had some conflict issues?
Yeah, a lot of
They may be
conflict.
actually trying to put hunters into more successful seasons rather than that late season, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah, there are places across the Wasatch that we tend to have nuisance bear issues. It's a high recreation area, but we did add harvest objective permits on the Wasatch, but just not specifically on the front. Is that what you're
Yeah, I
asking?
think they added it to like the Wasatch. The text I got said there's nothing on the face. So whatever that means.
We don't.
So the biologist is Aaron Sisson.
Oh,
That would
okay.
be the person that you would like to reach out to.
Yeah, we don't split
I'm
it
not
out.
sure if you know him, though.
Yeah, I know. I know.
For bears, it's the whole.
I didn't even see him back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to speak to this? Trial by fire.
He came to the meeting and we got to put him to work here. So,
It's nice to have friends that throw you in front of the bus on occasion. So what is the question? You're wondering why there aren't?
I was seeing if you were paying attention, Aaron. Apparently
Yeah,
you weren't.
we don't separate the face from the rest of the unit, and we did add harvest objective tags to the Wasatch. So
The
there
question was,
a
I
net
think,
increase.
they didn't do the spot stock hunt though. So it's just more harvest objective so we can target these bears, but not the late spot stock hunt then.
Yes, most units, the harvest objective season is September through October. It's during the big game seasons.
Yeah.
There are some units, and I don't think Wasatch is one that has additional, they might have a quota for their bait, not their bait season, like their hound season. That's mostly a basin thing.
We've addressed it. I can text back.
Thank you.
Address it.
Now, back
Hey,
to,
since you're up there, can we talk about count? No, just kidding.
Just when I thought I was out.
okay, we're back to wherever we were at. Yeah, Bobcats, Furbearer rule. Any other questions from the RAC public? Sid presented, right? We're on discussion.
Sorry, we did not read the,
Oh, we didn't.
no.
Okay, we'll go to Sid then.
For agenda item 9, Utah Furbearer recommendations and rule, which best describes your position regarding the Furbearer recommendations? We had 0 votes and no comments submitted online.
Let's make a motion.
Because of that, going back to bears, I'll make a motion that we approve the Furbearer recommendations as presented.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
Okay, I think Kellen beat you, Jim. So Kellen seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All of those in favor? Amos?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Thank you, Darren. We are on to item number 10. Coyote Bounty Rule Amendments R 657-64, Devri Tanner.
So you've all hopefully seen the presentation and we can start with any questions and or comments that you have.
Excellent. Questions from the RAC for Devri?
I have one. I'm just curious, with the increase in coyote bounty price in mule deer, crucial winter range. Have you guys seen any data showing, hunting pressure has improved, like decreased abundance? I know there's been a lot of studies, like a recent 2024 study that came out as well, that pressure actually increases coyote abundance. So I'm just curious if the state has like our own data on that.
Yeah, so
Thank
there's
you.
actually a good question. That's a great question. Brock actually did a paper, and Kent Hersey and others, on the Monroe Mountain area in central Utah that was specifically looking at targeted coyote removal over 2 or 3 years. And Brock can speak more to this if I mess it up, but basically it showed that repeated removal in the same areas, and they did fawning areas for mule deer, that this helped the mule deer because it was targeted and over time. And I believe the paper you might be talking about that was just recently published saying that hunting can increase coyote populations, that it is true that if there's coyotes density is decreased, they can have compensatory regeneration, which usually there's a lag. Anyways, not to get off topic, but that study was done there's a couple sites in southern Utah and then a couple in northern Utah, so it wasn't as Utah specific. So there is science on both sides, but we do have good evidence from the study done just a few years ago by Brock and Kent and others that repeated removal in these crucial areas does benefit mule deer, which is the purpose of this recommendation, is we're trying to incentivize people to do that targeted take in those areas that'll be most beneficial to mule deer.
Devri, that $250,000 allotment, that's an annual allotment. So
Correct.
that'd be 5,000 animals, right?
Yes, I'm very bad at mental math, but
Yeah, at $50 a piece, right?
yes.
Is that 250,000 typically exhausted?
No, actually that's, if you look, each year we do an annual coyote report, and in the beginning years of the program, we were allotted 500,000. And in the first years, it did meet or exceed that 500,000. But in the last 5 years, we haven't gone anywhere near that, which is why it was reduced to 250,000 a year. And this past fiscal year, which goes like June to July or July to June, we only had 152,000 payout, which is pretty consistent of the last 5 years. So we're not reaching that upper limit of the 250 allotted.
When someone shoots a coyote, there's no reporting requirement, correct?
There actually is, so in the past, there was paper compensation forms, but there's currently, and it's been in the rule for about a year now with the current app, but there is the Survey 123 app on your phone, and you're required to take a picture of the coyote right when you kill it, and that picture will connect to your location data. And that's to ensure, to decrease fraud, and also to ensure that we have accurate data for the location and the time of kill.
Right, but if you're not asking for compensation,
Oh, if you're not asked, yeah, correct. Because
then there's no
don't have
reporting
management
requirement, right?
over- What?
There's no reporting requirement if you're not
Correct,
asking for compensation.
because, yeah, coyotes are.
And last but
so.
not least, the coyote killing contest, wildlife killing contest that some of the towns will put on. Does DWR have any involvement in overseeing those?
No, so I think that we have an official statement about it, but essentially those contests happen and they're not under our control. In the past, I believe and others who have been at the division longer can speak to this more, but I believe in the past we've had people checking in coyotes from the DWR at those contests, but we're no way endorsing these or supporting them. Our goal in being there in the past has just been to make sure that the law is followed in terms of getting compensation for coyotes, to make sure that they're killed within Utah. But now that we have the app, we no longer send employees to those killing contests because we can ensure the location was in Utah through the app requirements. And I don't know if.
Yeah, John, the only thing I would add is that we do have in policy that we don't support those killing type contests. So that's our official stance on it.
There
But
you go.
obviously coyotes aren't protected. They don't technically
Right.
fall under our jurisdiction. So, folks can do those things if they want to.
Got it. Thank you, guys.
Any other questions from the RAC?
Yeah, I had one or two. I know you spoke to this in the presentation, but why the change to Department of Agriculture and Food away from Wildlife Services? What prompted that?
So, historically, wildlife UDAF was working with Wildlife Services. They've been work over the last 3 or 4 years. UDAF wasn't happy with that relationship. I think that's fair to say. They had some concerns. Most of the employees that worked under that program were state employees, and UDAF felt like that they felt like they had some ideas that they wanted to implement and could be more effective if they just handled it themselves. And so that was their decision. And as a sister agency, we support that decision. And so now we work directly with them. So, and we've been happy with that relationship. They've implemented some technological changes and they do a good job. So we're happy with the arrangement.
So is Wildlife Services still operating in any capacity in Utah?
They do. And to be honest, I think probably what they're still working on to be urban geese, those kinds of things, and airports. They do still have some employees, but again, most of the folks that are doing sort of what we think of in Utah were state employees, and those folks are still employed with UDAF. And so a lot hasn't, if you're a producer, your trapper's probably the same trapper that you've had for years and years.
Yeah.
It's just
Right.
the administrative oversight that changed.
Yeah. And then, Devri, I have 1 or 2 more questions. I read through both the Mule Deer Protection Act and the Predator Control Funding Act when they were passed in 2012. And I just want to make sure I understand how they operate correctly. So from the Predator Control Funding, the state charges a $5 surcharge, and that amounts to $600,000, and that goes directly into this restricted predator control program. Is that correct?
The restricted predator control account.
Okay, and then I think it was 1.5 million that the state legislature authorizes from the Mule Deer Protection Act. Is that, so when we sort of fulfill the bounty obligations, does this DWR present that to the legislature, then they're reimbursed, or maybe just how does that funding go from the legislature to the DWR?
I believe, and again, Darren can speak more to this, but I believe we're given the 250,000 and whatever we don't spend, and then we can spend from that. And things have changed recently with how,
Oh, don't make me get into fiscal stuff. No. So there's a $5 fee. Those funds that are generated, typically the activities we're using, that's what we're funding our UDAF aerial targeted removals with. Some of that money goes to pay for each regional wild predator management specialist. So some of that money goes towards staff to help with implement the program. The bounty, the legislature's authorized us to spend up to 250,000, but that just comes with our general appropriation. We get a lump of money, and part of that can be spent on bounty. And so that is put into that budget. And that's how that works. At the end of the year, if we don't spend it all, it goes right back into the system, and then it starts fresh the new year.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Mike.
I've got a question. Was it considered to increase the bounty in the mule deer areas during the spring, during fawning times, when it's been shown to really help?
Yeah, so we did discuss timing as we're trying to look at this program and figure out how we can best utilize the funding to protect mule deer. We discussed timing as one of the possibilities. We worried by inputting a certain an increased bounty for a certain time period that it would be difficult to track that and to enforce that, so to speak, because from the time you killed a coyote, you have 365 days to submit it for bounty, which would be difficult to enforce a specific season that is less than their time they have to submit it. And another point from the research is that, and again, Brock, you can speak to this more since you worked on it, but they pointed out that coyotes are pretty territorial. And so if you're hunting coyotes within these mule deer areas, it can benefit the mule deer, even if you kill them outside of like that right before they're going to fawn time period, especially if it's repeated takeover over time, that even if you kill them, say in like the fall or the spring, it'll still help the mule deer because it's in that same area where they've had territory.
That makes really good sense. There was one comment that came in from the public that I thought made a lot of sense, was that, you know, the pelts by the time the spring rolls around are not as of, you know, the same value. Well, they're valueless really. So incentivizing that kind of take would be a way to get people out to continue to do that. There was one other thing I was going to say. I'm getting old. Yeah.
I can speak to that comment a little bit, because the timing that we recommend for the Coyote program, and it says this in the training that you take when you're planning to participate, that we recommend December to June as the timing to take the coyotes because of the pair bonds typically form for coyotes between like December and February, and that's the most effective time to remove them before they raise, after they form pair bonds, but before they raise pups. And so December to February still is, from what I understand, good pelt quality. So you can take coyotes that have good pelts during that time, and they'll still be effective, because sometimes it takes roughly, it's been said there's about 6 months like before other coyotes will fill into that same area. And December to February is about 6 months before the fawning period happens. So.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then with the reporting requirement, that's what I remember. The reporting requirement, they're going to have to take an actual picture of when they were. And so maybe in the future, maybe this isn't something we tackle tonight, but in the future, there could be a timestamp with that could address those issues if it felt like it was needed. So, all right, thanks.
Other questions for Devri? Any questions from the public? Turn the time over to Sydney for online comments.
All right, for agenda item number 10, Coyote Bounty Rule Amendments. The question is, which best describes your position regarding the recommended changes to Administrative Rule R657-64? There were 3 total votes, 1 strongly agree, 1 neither agree nor 2 neither agree nor disagree, for a weighted average of 3.67. Summarized comments include appreciation for seeking to optimize coyote control to help mule deer using existing funds. Another comment stated lions needed an incentive. And a third comment, I like the direction this is going, but it isn't doing enough. Suggests a more aggressive approach, maybe $25 for coyotes killed in non-mule deer areas and $125 to $150 for coyotes killed in critical habitat.
Thank you, Sid. We do not have a comment card on this item, so we'll bring it back to the RAC for discussion.
Hey, Darren, I got a question about bobcats real quick.
Yeah, thanks a lot, buddy.
Yeah, Brooke, I got a comment. Yeah, I don't know. This raising the predator bounty doesn't sit very well with me. And I think the reason it doesn't is because it seems very willy-nilly. And it seems like if we're going to be targeted and specific with removing coyotes, then we ought to have a good account for that. I researched this quite extensively. This I wrote a few years back. If you'll humor me, it's a paragraph and a half, and I'm going to read it because it summarizes what I felt then and what I feel now. Predator management programs remain controversial considering scientific findings which show reducing the number of predators in an area may help the deer population if reduction in predators occurs on a scale of less than 250 miles. That's a quote from the Mule Deer Working Group of Waterfowl. And in cases where you can't demonstrate the predator is in fact a population regulator, predator control is nonsensical. And I think Brock's own study supports that claim. Despite these findings, predator control still dominates media attention and DWR practice. Utah, historically and contemporarily, features prominently in the debate over this issue. For example, Guy Conley's article, Limiting Factors in Population Regulation, offers a synopsis of all the genuine field studies available in the literature on predator studies that involve mule deer or black-tailed deer. In some, studies in Utah account for 5 of the 19 included in the sample, more than any other state. The next highest was Arizona with 3. The study on the Pavant Range in central Utah determines, quote, it was not that different in the rise of fawn counts that were due solely to decreased populations. Another study in the Oak Creeks found predator control failed to restore the high fawn crop that apparently prevailed as late as 1939. In comparison with other impossibilities for increased deer population, the potential for predator control seemed marginal. The third study conducted in Daggett County found predators on the Daggett Range were more beneficial than harmful to deers. Of the 5 Utah studies, Conley summarizes 4 concluded that predator control efforts were either inconclusive or made trivial or made only trivial contribution to increase mule deer herds and hunter harvest. I could go on. That's another paragraph. I won't subject you to any more. I'll conclude by saying Terry Messmer at Utah State University, the Berryman Institute, argues more recently that old world perceptions about predators still dominate media and policy decisions. My issue isn't with killing coyotes by any means. I think agricultural producers need every tool in their tool belt. And I think as much as I don't like farming things out to wildlife services, as I've made clear in the past, now we have a different boogeyman. I like to see hunters kill those animals. I think for an organization like the DWR that prides itself on making scientific backed findings, I think the science is inconclusive. And so if we know we need to target fawning areas during the fawning time, why don't we make that bounty $100 and get the dense and the marginal ground, make it down to 0? Like there's no rationale. We're creating this boogeyman of coyotes. And I think the danger of doing that is it makes this species worthless. And I think once you do that, and once you do that to all predators, we need not look any further than your copy of Aldo Leopold to remember the Kaibab Plateau and what happens when you remove predators from the landscape. And so I think the state has this ability. I think they need to be much more targeted about it. And so for that matter, I can't support this because I think it's, I don't think it makes sense.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to push back a little bit. So most of those studies you cited are completely observational. So there's only one experimental study in all the literature, and it shows that it is effective. And so Utah has the best data in the world on mule deer. And it's clear some populations are absolutely not limited by predators. But it's equally clear that some populations are limited by predators, and Utah knows which populations those are. So I agree, it could be more targeted. We could go to populations, say, these 7 populations, we can have a real effect. But I do think this is a step in the right direction, and that's my opinion.
I mean, observational or not, you can't hardly really discredit in one fell swoop based on one more recent study. I mean, the facts still exist.
So those previous studies, Josh, if you did read them, they went out and counted fawn to doe ratios in December, and that's all they measured. They didn't measure anything else. And so I don't know how that tells you the effectiveness of a predator control program.
I mean, half of these quotes are from the Mule Deer Working Group in the, from Waffle. That's the experts on the issue. So, I mean, I'm on that working group. I know, but I'm citing to the working group.
I understand your comment, and I agree with a lot of it. But I do think this is a step. I mean, instead of giving bounties out in the West Desert where it has zero effect, I mean, I agree, it's not perfect. I'm not trying to argue that. I think it's a great step in the right direction as we're trying to be more targeted. But
Then let's be targeted about it. Like, I think.
I agree with that. Let's hire wildlife services or UDAF or whatever, and let's go into fawning range of populations.
I think being targeted in that particular kind of way allows for the species to exist on the landscape and not be made out to be the sole cause for the decline in this species. When we know things like weather and we know things like roads and we know.
I think everybody agrees weather's the primary driver.
Just make a quick comment. We talked about this. We came up with our best recommendation. There's nothing magical about $75 or $50. There's nothing magical about paying for West Desert coyotes or not paying. If the RAC would like to discuss that and talk about ways to be more targeted, we're happy to take those comments into consideration. Bear in mind, the bounty this is how I kind of look at it. The bounty program is kind of in this general sort of overall harvest across the state, and in some areas it might be somewhat effective, in other areas it's absolutely not. But we also have the UDAF program on top of that, where we're defining areas. They're taking coyotes from the air, they're using thermals, and they're getting the coyotes, the targeted coyotes. So that's going on too. So there's a lot of social in here. How do you spend your money? What's the most effective way? So
Social and legislative.
and legislative, remember the bounty program is in state code. It's not going to go away unless the legislature takes it away. So we can fiddle around the edges and with the money.
I'm not saying that the program should go away. I'm not advocating for that at all. I'm saying this program has been in place for 12 years, and I don't know that how it's being managed is being based on scientific evidence that the money is going towards what the goal is ultimately supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think there's lots of different ways to skin a cat. So
Well, and I think this is a real big step towards making it more scientific.
we're trying to move in the right direction.
This was coordinated a little bit with the mule deer committee, and the mule deer plan was, how can we get this, like this, it's called the Mule Deer, what act? The Mule Deer Protection Act. And so like myself personally, I don't know where the money goes that wasn't spent on this. So if we're really trying to make this protect mule deer, then I mean, I'm not going to suggest the number, but I think the dollar amount should be higher in the areas that really need it. And I also think that with the technology that the division is trying to implement with their reporting systems, like they can get dates and all the coordinates on it. They could make this so specific that they could be like, hey, on this unit, we're going to pay $200 a coyote. And we're going to cap it, like, yeah, outside of the mule deer area, we're going to cap it at a certain, money payout. And once that's hit, then it's hit and it's done. But I think that we're just on the edge of this. And I hope that the division comes back with it again, because I don't know all the technology that the division is going to implement to track things. But once that's implemented, I think that they can become much more precise and target. But I mean, I'm going to vote for this because I don't have all the answers, but hopefully smarter minds than mine can look at it and come up with a better tool in the toolbox here in the near future.
I'm going to vote for it as well, but to Josh's point, you could wipe out all the coyote in those critical areas, and the impact is still going to be fairly negligible.
In 2 years of control, we were able to increase fawn survival from 46 to 75%. That's not negligible.
Based on what?
What do you mean based on what?
You're giving me numbers based on what? What percentage of predator coyote?
Only removing 70 coyotes a year off the fawning zone. We increased We had control areas where it was still 46%. Did a Baki design before, after control, switched the sites. One went back to 46%. The other side went back to 76%. So we were able to increase with 2 years of control, 30% of the fawns lived,
A lot of other variables involved with it.
right? That's why you do a controlled experiment.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this one as well, Josh. I think you made some good points, though. It's not perfect, but it's really a social issue. And what I heard was, the first few years of this program, people got really excited and shot coyotes. Ever since then, it's kind of just, it's stalled out. And so maybe a few more coyotes will get shot. But I think for $75, when you look at your price of gas and time and effort, it's still not going to be like, wow, I'm going to make a ton of money shooting coyotes here. So I think that, yeah, we're giving out some money for a few people to go out and shoot coyotes. It's not very targeted. I agree. It'd be nice to have some technology in the future or some more ways to focus on areas and say, hey, this year, this area, a little extra money. But the reality is hunting coyotes is hard, especially once they've been shot at or hunted. It's just not going to be that many coyotes getting shot by hunters. I think aerial removal, UDAF, they're really good at what they do, but the rest of us hunters, we're not very good. So
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, Mike said as much, like if you've identified these critical areas, granted, there's a lot of yellow on the map that was shown on the slides. Make that area $200 a coyote and let's not bother with the rest of the state. Like, if you're leaning on this study, Brock, why aren't we leaning on the study even more so? I
agree with that. I mean, if somebody wanted to make that motion, I'm not even voting unless it's a tie, but I would say don't give a bounty elsewhere and give a bounty where we're helping the mule deer.
It just seems like in 12 years, I don't know. I don't know what we've accomplished.
To Josh's point, and I think Darren kind of mentioned this, that we do have the liberty to adjust that bounty. And I mean, we're all saying the same thing. Let's decrease it where it doesn't matter, where it's insignificant, and let's increase it where we actually have labeled or targeted those areas as critical. Why not?
You mean recommend?
Yes.
Yes.
I would entertain a motion. Do it.
Well, I'm going to move that we accept the recommendation that was given to us by the division with the caveat that they continue to look at ways to target the compensation to areas to really be more effective with mule deer.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to approve as presented with the recommendation that they look to be more targeted or possibly reward people more for the targeted zones. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Amos?
Yes.
Opposed? Well, it passes 9-1. Okay, agenda item number 12, West Desert Complex. Oh, 11, shed. Oh, I was trying to skip all these people that are here.
If there's one opposed, do we get a comment from them?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Josh. Josh, provide your, let's have a comment on why you voted against this. I figured I knew it, but if you want to articulate it, go ahead.
I said it.
Yeah,
No, but
right.
I will add, I think Braden's motion actually was well said, and I can get behind that. I think down the line, I didn't want this to be an unanimous vote because I wanted the point to be made.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll represent that in the board
Sorry,
meeting.
one clarification for the notes. Did you second the motion? Jim Schuler seconded. Thank you.
Okay, agenda item number 11, shed antler gathering recommendations. Rusty Robinson, once in a lifetime species coordinator.
It's all people can tolerate. It's just once.
Dr. Rusty Robinson, PhD, once in a lifetime.
Thanks, Brock.
Director in waiting.
I don't know if go with that.
You have anything you want to add, Rusty, or are you ready for questions?
I could probably just give a brief summary. This is a pretty simple recommendation. This past spring, we made a lot of recommendations to the Wildlife Board concerning changes to shed antler gathering. Most of those were adopted, with the exception of the committee recommended and the division recommended a non-resident shed season that started May 1st. That was voted down, and the Wildlife Board asked the division to reconvene the shed antler gathering committee and to kind of revisit that topic of not resident versus non-resident season dates. And a lot of the sentiment behind it was let's not jump on this bandwagon that other states are doing where we treat non-residents differently. And so we reconvened the committee, and after much deliberation, we are basically recommending again to the Wildlife Board that there be no season dates for residents, and no season dates for non-residents. So basically status quo at this point. Where that got voted down, that's currently where we're at, and the division is making that recommendation that at this time there be no seasonal closures or openings, no seasons for shed hunting.
Thank
Unless we want to go back to waterfowl, I'm happy to answer.
So Rusty, how split were the votes on the committee? I mean, you said that there was no consensus. Was it like 8-8 or was it
So
15-1?
There was very strong unanimous consensus on the resident. The committee was adamant that they didn't want resident season dates. But yeah, the non-resident stuff was all over the board. There was at least 5 different I think that vote was 4-6 against the reciprocity system. So we thought we're moving on, and then it kept coming up, And so I think we voted again, and it was 5-5. So it was just really all over the board. So it's pretty split on the non-resident season dates. Anywhere from let's stick with the May 1st start date to let's treat Wyoming like they treat us and everybody else can shed hunt to, I mean, it was all over the board. So it was trying to take the high road while not taking the high road, it seems like at times.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions for Rusty?
I've got a couple. Why does the state close WMAs to shed hunting?
I think every WMA has their own wildlife management area plan. And so that's just up to the regions, whether they're closed. I assume most of the time just for wintering wildlife.
So we're closing shed hunting on our state lands to protect wandering wildlife. Is that what I'm to believe?
I see where you're going with this.
I'm good at leading horses. So
Yeah. You'd have
You're
to
not
ask whoever wrote those wildlife management area plans, but.
Okay. Why do other states, why have all of our neighbors instituted shed hunting closures and seasons?
You'd have to ask them.
I think that would have been a really good thing for us to actually proactively reach out for.
Mhm.
You know, on the mule deer committee, I mean, I talked to other states. I met with biologists from other states. So I don't really like that answer because there has to be a reason. And I was hoping that we could get a reason why every state around us feels the need to have a shed hunting season to protect their wildlife is what I think.
And I think you're right, Mike. I think there's a strong public sentiment out there that wildlife need a break during the winter, and let's give them a break.
And why did the division go to the legislature last year to ask for legislative authority so the board could institute a shed season?
Shoot, for non-residents?
Well, actually it was for both.
So the committee and the division, we didn't make recommendations for a resident season. It was for non-residents only. And the reasoning behind that was where most of the surrounding states have a start date of May 1st. The worry was that we would be inundated with non-residents that aren't allowed to shed hunt in their own state, and so they'd come over here to shed hunt. And it was more of an issue of let's not be inundated by non-residents during that time of year.
Okay, all right. But the division did go to the legislature and ask them to grant the authority to the Wildlife Board to institute shed antler seasons, correct?
Right,
Okay.
that the Wildlife Board would have authority because at the time, it was questionable whether or not, it wasn't clear if the Wildlife Board had clear authority to oversee recreational shed hunting.
Thank you.
Yep.
Rusty, a lot of this it seems to me though that when I've looked at why other states have done shed seasons. I've got and kind of dug through like, hey, what was in the hearings? What was the behind the scenes? For the record, I'm a shed antler gatherer, not a hunter, just a gatherer. But I have a conflict here. I need to state that for the record. But most of them are targeting, they talk about disturbance to wildlife, but it usually was targeted towards like a bad actor. And instead of just saying, hey, we're going to use the harassment laws on the books, a lot of it was just like, hey, it's just a one size fits all because it's too hard to target the bad actor that's out there pushing animals, pushing. So because of the few bad actors, we're just going to pass this one size fits all regulation. And I think that's where states have kind of landed is like, hey, we're going to limit disturbance from these few bad, unethical, whatever you want to call them, shed hunters that are out there pushing deer and elk. But the reality, like when you talk to biologists in other states, they're like, we could not have a season and be fine if it wasn't for the people that are on four-wheelers pushing deer and elk and trying to get antlers to fall off. Call around.
I've actually talked to some biologists, and I'll save that for the comment period, but that's completely opposite of that.
Other questions for Rusty? Any questions from the public? Bring it back to Sydney for public online comments.
All right, for agenda item 11, shed antler gathering recommendations. The question was, which best describes your position regarding the shed antler gathering committee's recommendations? There were 2 votes, 1 strongly agree and 1 strongly disagree, for a weighted average of 3. The summary of comments: agreement with committee recommendations and glad there are no fees or restrictions. Approve of emergency board closures if/where needed. Would like to see a non-resident shed season for Wyoming residents.
So the public comments reflect the committee. So we have 1 public comment. Garrett, if you want to come up, you have up to 5 minutes.
Garrett Slatkoff, representing the Utah chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Our organization supports this proposal. We were lucky enough to have a board member sit on the committee. She shared some insights and information about the conversations that were had based off of the data presented, and not wanting to necessarily reciprocate against some of those non-resident states. I didn't think that was fair, so we support this proposal.
Thank you, Garrett. Bring it back to the committee for discussion.
Well, so I shed hunt a ton, or used to, and I have talked with some biologists in those conversations that I had during the mule deer committee, and it was getting out of control. It wasn't just a few bad actors. It was kind of becoming the norm. It was like somebody every day was out pushing. And I know that there has been some collar data that's been put together that shows that maybe they don't get pushed as much as we think they do. My biggest fear is when every state around us has a shed season, except Arizona, yeah. Then those people come to our state. And I've shed hunted a couple areas of the Book Cliffs, and the number of Colorado license plates that are there is astounding. I don't see any Utah license plates, and I see Colorado, and that's because they're close. I don't think we get that issue maybe here along the Wasatch Front or in some areas. And so it worries me that going forward, because I think Idaho, I mean, I just heard the Idaho put together a season that's going to be implemented this year. And so I really don't want to be restricted to a season, but I also look at it like we close our WMAs to protect our wildlife. There's some things there that just don't add up to me. And I don't know. Was the member from our RAC that was on the shed committee? No, he's not here, is he? Oh, you were on it? Okay. Well, I thought that Scott Jensen was on it. Scott wasn't? Okay. So back in the April, back when it was first presented, the shed committee never asked for a resident season. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
That's what I was thinking. So.
But to your point, Mike, that's exactly why we pushed for a non-resident season.
Yeah.
For exactly what you're describing was so that we didn't suddenly get inundated with non-residents coming into the state because their state was still closed.
Yep.
That was why we pushed for that.
Yeah. And I don't think it should be tit for tat, like they have to start and we don't, but the only way to do it and not have that is if everybody has a shed season. So I almost think that it should be, I would be more comfortable with some kind of non-resident shed season, rather than just have a free for all. I think it's going to become more of a free for all. It's become that way over the years, and it feels like it's going down that road more.
So we could still recommend that from our RAC. I mean, we could give the exact same recommendation that was given last time if we wanted.
And I'm in the same boat, Mike, on that one. Like this is a social issue, I think, on that point you're making, right? It's just, if other states are doing it, let's not have all these guys from out of state, guys and gals, come into Utah and shed hunt and create more wildlife disturbance too. Just we become the target of everyone coming to Utah. 100%, I would back a non-resident season. Now, I do worry about the slippery slope, right? It's like once you say, sure, do a non-resident season and start charging a fee for non-residents, it's like, well, let's just do a season and make it just a May 1st season for everybody again. I think that's just, every year I feel like we're on something with shed hunting the last couple of years. It's just been ever since the closure of, was it 22, whatever the winter that was, 22, 23. It's just been this ongoing. So I was telling a couple of friends of mine that, yeah, I would support a non-resident closure only because of exactly the point you made. Just, they've already got seasons all around us. So for me, it's more of a tit for tat. I don't know. It's probably childish. So anyway.
I'm going to push back on that. I mean, we're using this phrase tit for tat. I think, man, when you start saying non-res can't do this and non-res can't do that, I mean, I hunted 3 states this year. I probably hunted 3 or 4 last year. And I understand it's more to pay for the tag. Like, I understand that point of it. But when you start chipping away at, like, you know, hunters' right to access wilderness areas in Wyoming, on public land, unless they're accompanied by a licensed guide or a resident Wyoming, that irks me in a way that I find so grating. Because I have a tag, I paid the money for it, and yet there's this arbitrary boundary that I can't access public land. And I think when you say the state can access Forest Service land, but Wyoming residents can't, hunters lose out across the board. Hunters lose out, and that's why I don't like the non-resident season. So
no, and that's a good point. I think the other concern I do have with just seasons in general that just drives me nuts is, you know, shed hunters can't be on the landscape looking for sheds, but I can be biking, I can be motorcycling, I can be walking my dog, I can be doing whatever I want. But if I'm picking up that antler, suddenly I'm disturbing wildlife. And so I think it's very arbitrary in the fact that one group is targeted instead of saying, hey, this area is closed off for disturbance because of wildlife. And so that's what I struggled with a lot with these seasons is everybody else could be out pushing deer, but a shed hunter is now the problem.
I was on the committee and we discussed everything you can imagine. From the Forest Service perspective, BLM, use and degradation of two tracks, dirt roads, everything, gates being broken, everything. And we very much considered, I think, a lot of those things, and we weighed all of those things. And kind of to Braden's point, there was a lot of things that we felt like it was a violation of one specific group. Because my wife is a trail runner and we've got 2 dogs, and she takes those dogs running on all of the trails through Utah County. And she has no idea that there may have been a rule in place until I tell her, right? And those dogs are running up and down the hills. They're just as much, they're far more intrusive and invasive in what's going on than any shed hunter I've ever known. And so, but that somehow is fine. That's completely acceptable. And, I'm going to give a really lame example. Chucker hunting, in certain areas I find antlers and I pick them up, but during the closure a couple of years ago, I'm literally shooting a shotgun and there's deer right there and they don't even react. But if I suddenly pick up this antler on a criminal, there's just some things just doesn't make sense, right? So I guess where I'm conflicted with this whole thing because there's already rules and regulations on protecting wildlife and not disturbing wildlife. If you're an outdoorsman, if you're a sportsman, you understand those rules and you know those rules. They apply to all of us at all times. So why do we feel the need to suddenly put closures and other things in place that basically is double covering that rule? Doesn't make sense to me. So I think that the rules that are in place are sufficient. I don't think we need to have any other closures. Certainly don't need more dates and additional regulations. This is the land of the free. I hate more rules. I hate more government. I hate all of that stuff because it's not necessary. And if, there's going to be those outliers, the 1%ers that are going to cheat, but that won't change if we implement new rules and new seasons and things. That they're going to still do what they're going to do.
Thank you. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I would support this as it's presented from the DWR side. And a lot of it goes back to the shed committee, spent a lot of time putting something together. And it's the same. I have a lot of heartburn when it comes to the CWMU committee, when they do a proposal, they've done their part, and then it comes to the RAC and then we want to change it. And I think as long as we are judicious in what our discussion is and that we have the opposition and it's showed and it's on record of what we have, because that's going to come back at some point. At least it's in the record that there's some questions, some things like that, and making a proposal, that changes that. I probably wouldn't vote for it. I would vote for what the DWR has come forward with, but I appreciate the comments because it has made me think a lot, but I do not want to discount the hard work that the shed committee went through to come up with this. And for us as land management agencies, all the recreation that takes place out on the ground is shut down an activity, one specific activity that I can't go ride my horse and, pick up a shed as I'm riding along, same thing. What does that preclude? How does that make me a villain in that sense? So I think that there's some value in what's been said, but I would support this as it's presented from the DWR.
Go ahead.
The other observation I'll make tonight is when I pulled in, I expected to see a lot more vehicles and a lot more public. Oftentimes I've noticed, it seems like when we've got the proposal where it needs to be, we're not getting a lot of opposition or people on either side saying this is terrible. I think that kind of shows that the public's like, hey, I can live with that. So that's just a point. You look around, we haven't had anybody from the public say this is terrible. So yeah, maybe I'm with you, Eric. I'm going to just go as presented.
Excellent.
And I felt the same way when I would have a hard time saying, nope, we're going to institute a shed season when the division's recommendation is to not. Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, they're recommending to not, so it's probably not going to change. And maybe that's their folly if it does change through the process. That can be. I will say one thing. I've been fortunate to serve on many committees, and I will never, ever tell anybody not to change what I came up with, because I'm just one person on a committee. And yeah, the committee does a lot of work, but it's a privilege to be on a committee. And so, but that doesn't mean that the committee's always right. And on this one, I lean towards the fact that shed hunting has a profound effect on our wildlife. It's not a guy riding his horse usually, or trail running down the Bonneville Trail. It's somebody that's hiking a ridge, and they watch the bulls shed, and they watch them shed one side, and so they got 3 guys running up there, and then those bulls get blown into the next drainage. And so I don't think we solved that issue with the season. I think we solved that issue coming up with very punitive harassment measures that we can educate people and that we can somehow enforce them, you know, and I think I think that's where it has to go myself. And as much as I don't like every other state going to a season and watching us get inundated with non-residents, I tend to agree with Josh that it's pretty hard to regulate that, you know. I'd hate to be the law enforcement officer trying to figure that out, but I think that, Rusty, I have a question for you. Yes, Dr. Sure.
Robinson, PhD.
You're just embarrassing your institution at the right now.
Oh, he got it through BYU? Oh, well.
So it's not real.
I got it from USU or somewhere.
I mean, I'm no Aggie.
Is the division committed to like tracking like non-resident enrollment in a shed hunting corps and seeing if we are getting more of an impact, and maybe even going back and looking years past, like people from
Yes.
Colorado that didn't, and now they're closed down, so now they are?
Yeah, so we went back and pulled all the numbers since 2009 of resident shed hunters and non-resident shed hunters. Currently, I thought I kind of expected a gradual increase, especially non-residents, and it's actually been a little bit the opposite. Since 2019, we've actually been kind of a gradual decline. We went from about 1,700 non-residents to about 1,400 non-residents over those years, with 2020 being an anomaly for everybody. But other than that, it's kind of a gradual decline, and residents are kind of hovering around 15, 16,000. So yeah, it's not a real exponential trend.
And was there any discussion on the committee to require a hunting license to shed hunt like other states do?
There was. We actually, we would need a couple changes in code to do that. And that kind of died at the legislative level. That was didn't gain a lot of traction at the legislature.
Yeah, that was proposed to the legislature when you took through the other things and it
Correct.
died.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Mike, real fast, just so I'd like to make everybody aware, we built this thing, the committee put together something that I think was awesome. And, you know, it wasn't perfect for sure. Everybody from a committee who's ever been involved in the committee says the same thing, but it was a group of people that got together and worked really hard to come up with something that made sense. And we wanted to give law enforcement the ability, and we kept saying more teeth to bite, because it was really, the issues really were those that didn't care about the law and were going to do what they wanted to do regardless. And that's where that's the part that we didn't like, right? So, but how do you enforce that, something like that? And so we said, well, we're going to take away hunting privileges. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to make everybody buy, and this is stupid, but a $5 or whatever it was, I can't remember, a shed hunting permit. And now it's associated with your hunting privileges, so that if there is a violation, there's something that's, you know, we can do something about it. But like Rusty said, what ended up happening was a very diluted version of what we'd come up with. And here we are still, right? So I don't know if I said too much or not enough, Rusty, but.
Well, that was great. And to answer your original question, yeah, we've tracked the numbers, and we're committed to continue to track resident, non-resident, and see if those trends are getting out of control one way or another.
I think we've discussed. I'd welcome a motion.
I'd make a motion that we approve the presentation as presented by the division.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion to approve as presented and a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor
Yes.
and opposed? The vote is 9-1. Mike, do you want to add something that I share directly with the board? Nope. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we're on to agenda item number 12, the West Desert Complex Deer and Elk Management Plans. Jason Robinson, wildlife biologist, Tooele District. Do you have anything you want to add, Jason, before we pose questions? Nope. Any questions for Jason from the RAC?
Got some, have you, it says in here in the plan that you've got area, you're going to translocate area or elk into places, and I'm would be specific into the house, Swayze, whatever you call it, Tinnick house area, the big large one.
So we don't have any plans currently to do a translocation. We just have that in there as an option, and we would follow the statewide management plan in regards to that. So
All
it's
right.
just leaving us the option to do it if we decide that we wanted to in the future.
All right, because within that unit that's set up, the biggest elk habitat area, I guess, would say is that Tinnick, Sage Valley, Severe River, all of that, which has been spent, I don't know, 10 years ago, there was a big push, went to an open unit to basically decrease those. And was the reason at that time, was it agricultural reasons to decrease the
A lot of it
population?
was, it's a limited entry deer unit, a big chunk of that, the Vernon deer unit. And we didn't want to have any kind of competition for that. But we've since collared both deer and elk in that area. And there's not a lot of habitat overlap between the two species. And then, things change, right? We've had fires, stuff kind of come back as elk habitat. And so when we reevaluated it, and, there's been a push in recent years to increase elk hunting opportunities. And so with all those things that have happened over the last, decade and a half, it felt like this would be an area to grow some elk as well as increase hunting opportunity.
Okay, and then as you do your surveys, for the 1,400 or whatever it is, so there's 650 in 3 units and 201. As you go through that, could those units actually be above, I guess, end up above the objective in some and not in others? So this, and I would look at that house Tinnick one being as large as it is, not really being able to ever get to that 650 mark. But if the objective is that, then with the other units to be able to say, yeah, we're hitting our objective, be the ones that are now 800, 900, compensating for that miss in the other side.
What we would
Cost
tend to
problems.
do, and that's why we've broke it up into the 4 units, is to keep those individual units at that number. So we wouldn't have 1,200 on one unit and 0 on another. That's the intent, is to distribute them across the entire landscape based on available habitat, impacts to agriculture, water, all the other things that we consider. So yes, the intent would be, and that's why we have those numbers, is to keep those populations within the boundary area at that objective.
All right. Thank you.
Jason, I have one question, probably not for elk, but for deer, will this change the allocation that goes to in the public draw versus private lands versus CWMU? Do these boundaries affect any of that, or are they going to stay the same?
So the permit allocations, like CWMUs, would likely stay the same, the 2 that we have within this area. The permit allocations would be based on the system that we use for all the units. And so there would be a bit of a shift in just based on the objective and the number, the buck to doe ratios. There's a couple of proposals in the statewide plan currently to change some of the buck to doe ratios for these units. And so we would then manage to those buck to doe ratios based on all the survey information.
I've got a question. So historically, the Tinnick has had, when we see buck to doe ratios, that always says not available. So what's the plan to actually get those and maybe not use the ochres and actually look at what the Tinnick is?
Yeah, so some of these West Desert units have always been problematic, just low deer densities, limited days to collect that data. And so what we've done is we've used all available data, buck to doe ratios, but we also look at hunter success rates and a few other metrics. And so what we would like to do is have basically an internal meeting to determine the best strategy for getting the data for each of these units. And candidly, we'll have better data on some units than others just because of the limitations on access, days in the field, all those kinds of things. But we will try and do our best to get that data as clean and as good as we can.
And are there any current studies like going on in some of those low density units, like the Tintic or, out on the Swayzes or anywhere like that, or deep creeks? Have we collared deer and to see kind of how that herd is doing?
So it's a very huge area. And so we have data on some of the units and not on others. I mean, we have some data on all of them, but we have had a very long, extensive monitoring effort on the Oquirrhs and the Tinics specifically for nearly a decade now, where we collar. So that's part of our statewide survival trend. And then we've also had some collars on the Vernon deer unit as well as the Tintic as well. And so we've got data on those. We currently don't have any on like the Swayze unit, basically, Deep Creeks and some of those other mountain ranges. But that's something we could look at in the future.
Yeah, I think historically that those units were great producers of deer and now they're not. So I think that would be a great thing. The other question I had was about if we put another 500 elk out on that more fragile desert ecosystem with the amount of public grazing and then the number of Mustangs, is that overloading it, kind of like we said happened on the Book Cliffs?
So we looked at it and we had that consideration. It's an enormous area. That house Tintic unit is an extremely large area. And when we collared some of those elk out there with the GPS units, we saw that they were using some of this juniper grassland habitat, that there's a lot of that type of habitat out there. And honestly, a lot of the fires have created more. And some of that higher kind of mid elevation seems to be an area where the grass actually responds pretty good and the elk utilize that quite a bit. So we looked at it pretty carefully, taking in livestock as well. And this was a number we felt comfortable with and the committee felt comfortable with. Not that it couldn't change in the future based on, information in the future or changing climate or fires, out of those kinds of things. But at the time, we feel like this is a number that area can sustain. And a lot of the horses are kind of further north in like the Skull Valley area. You probably have more horses in that area. There's fewer in that house Tintic area.
Any other questions from the RAC? Any questions from the public? Turn it over to Sydney for online comments.
All right, agenda item number 12, West Desert Complex Deer and Elk Management Plans. Question reads, which best describes your position regarding the proposed West Desert Complex Deer and Elk unit plans? There were 2 total votes, 1 somewhat disagree, 1 strongly disagree, for a weighted average of 1.5, with a single comment, concern about forage being used by other animals.
Thank you, Sydney. We have 1 public comment. Garrett?
Garrett Slatkoff, representing Utah chapter Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Organization supports this proposal based off the data and information shown in Jason's proposal. We think the unit structure makes sense. We're also excited about the potential opportunity for increased elk, both from a growing the population perspective and hunter opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Garrett. And 1 more comment, Troy Justison.
Troy Justison, I didn't get dressed up for nothing to come here and not speak. Now, new approach tonight, rather than hear my voice come up here and support all these things, as a whole, SFW supports all the recommendations from the division tonight. But Bryce brought a lot of things back to my memory, and I want to go back just a little bit to the shed committee. I actually sat on that with him. And out of all the committees I've ever sat on, if there's one thing going into that I would have said, hey, it's a given we're going to do, and that was set a shed season. But after listening to what you reported and going through everything and all the information and data, it just wasn't right. The real area that we missed, though, and Bryce alluded to it, is we had the opportunity to put some teeth in it with creating a license, not only to take care of the bad actors, but generate some income to go specifically for target areas for coyotes. We just talked about Furbearers tonight. We got a little over 2,000 Furbearers in the state, and we charge them to have a Furbearer's license. We got nearly 20,000 people that apply for a shed hunting application, whatever it is. We don't charge them. It's a multi-million-dollar business. We missed the opportunity to generate some funds to help protect critical wildlife here in the state of Utah. I'm not opposed to other people coming here and enjoying it, but let's make them help foot the bill to take care of wildlife. So in the future, when this comes around, I hope that we'll gain the support to go back through, because we really thought we had something, something was important that actually could benefit wildlife. And we talked about earmarking those funds for specifically going in and targeting those coyotes. That's something we do as an organization. Myself, SFW, we've hired a few sharpshooters, and we go to a specific area in the elevation where the fawning grounds are, and we pay a fair chunk of money to have coyotes removed in that area. So it is effective. So thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Bring it back to the RAC for discussion.
I've got a question on shed antler gathering as well. No, sorry, guys. I was on this committee and representing a few landowners, as was some of the guys that have allotments out there as well. And that was one of the concerns as far as, Mike's comment about, is there going to be competition with cattle grazers, sheepmen, with the horses out there, et cetera. And I think the plan has enough tools in it that if we start seeing increases in population, et cetera, there's tools that Jason can put out to then say, hey, if the population's getting too high or we're having issues, let's address. I think all the landowners, all the folks that had allotments out there were generally supportive of the plan. So
That's actually really good information. I personally like the plans. I would love to see some kind of a study in those fragile systems. I would love to see deer collars on the Swayzes and on the deep creeks. And I mean, you'd be, you might get one or two here and there. And on the deep creeks, I think you could get a lot more. I think the plan overall is really good.
I know, like on the Swayzes, and this is something, Jason, as you go forward with that there are 3 HMAs within that area that you didn't mention. You mentioned up in Salt Lake there, but you do have the Congers, the Confusions, and the Swayzes, the wild horses in those. And there are a small number of deer there. And historically, and this was coming from my predecessor that was over the wild horse program there out of Fillmore, used to hunt that Swayze unit, and said that the DWR guy would stop by and tell him how many deer came through the deer counters the night before that were coming off of the Vernon unit and going across that desert there. And then, changing management on that Vernon unit to quit that migration level of what used to come off of there. And so there's some, I think it would be nice to see what the study is. Are you getting some of that movement again? Is it even there or not? Or is it just specifically a localized resident herd? And the same with the elk as those go in there, because I know that once, there are a few elk that we have noticed on Swayze. The ones we see on the Confusions are usually confused themselves and are just passing through. And then, I have yet to ever see one there on the Conger unit, HMA there. But that's something that we as managers would be concerned about, because for us, as we talk with permittees, when it comes time and we're in the drought issues or we're dealing with that kind of stuff, we have control over the livestock. We have control over the horses, but we don't have control over the wildlife. And that's one of the concerns that we end up with as we're dealing with the public ourselves.
I'm sure you meant to say feral horses, not wild horses.
Well, I have to say wild horses.
Really quick, along those lines, did you just say you have control over the wild horses?
We do. We have a chance to remove those. We don't have a chance to remove elk or deer.
And so when is that going to happen? I'm messing with you
We
completely.
just finished ours last year.
Any other discussion from the RAC? Yep.
Mine was just a comment that I also sat in on this committee, and I think it's a good proposal. I'm supportive of it. It's got good data. So
Thank you, Kellen.
As someone who, we graze our cattle out in this area, so I kind of have pretty mixed emotions of it. You know, there's elk all over us, you know, and on those years where the drought is really hard and that, it's hard for us and the cows, and we see it. And, you know, obviously that's more of a personal level for me, you know, but as the same thing, is it, you know, is there some more data that we could see and study and dig deeper into this to see of, is it just some localized smaller herds, you know, that we don't know about, or, you know, just haven't received the information. So I don't know. I kind of got some mixed feelings on this.
Thank you, Kellen. Entertain a motion.
I'd move that we accept the motion as presented by the DWR.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to accept as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Oh, here we go.
Yeah, here we go again. Oh, I heard that tone. So to me, I love the studies. And is there a way that we can ask that, I mean, this is a plan in our region. Is there a way we can ask the division to do that? Or is it just kind of leave it in the plan and let the experts deal with it?
We have done some studies in most of these regions on a limited basis. So the state has done some studies on most of these areas.
Okay.
Not the deep creeks.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that we could ask for more information from out there. I don't know if they'll do it or not. I mean, they have priorities and a limited budget, so it would have to become a priority.
And maybe we've talked about it enough that the division understands our desires.
I think that all the biologists for those regions are in this room. Okay, we have a motion. Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor? Amos?
I'll not in favor of that one at this time. I'm still.
Okay, do you want to give a reason why so I can represent that to the Wildlife Board, Amos?
No, we had discussion on that. I just mentioned that, there's probably need to be more studies, and I know you mentioned that there's been some studies, but not really a whole lot of it. So maybe providing more data, more information in those particular areas that would be more acceptable. So
perfect. Thank you very much, Amos. I'll have that in my notes. The motion passes 9-1. And with that, it brings us to we're adjourned.